Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Okay, so you know how we've all been seeing those headlines about new weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy? Even Mounjaro's getting in on the action.
Right, they're everywhere.
It seems like everyone's talking about them. Some are saying they're miracle cures, and others are saying, well, maybe they're budget busters.
Yeah.
So what is the real story with these medications?
Well, that's what we're going to deep dive into today.
We're going to take a look at a proposal that could make these drugs way more accessible to a whole lot of Americans
Millions more.
through Medicare and Medicaid.
Exactly.
We're going to break down what that could mean for all of us.
It's a big shift because right now Medicare actually can't cover weight loss drugs
Oh, really?
unless they're for treating something else, like if you have diabetes.
I see.
And then Medicaid coverage, that varies a lot from state to state, but in most states it's pretty limited.
So basically, the biggest hurdle right now is cost,
Yeah, cost is a huge barrier.
because we're talking well over $1,000 a month for some of these drugs.
Yeah.
So this proposal could really change things up in a big way.
It could really shake things up. So the Biden administration wants to reclassify obesity as a chronic disease,
Okay,
and that's a big deal
I can see how that would be a big deal.
because it means we're viewing it as a medical condition that needs treatment,
Right,
not just a lifestyle choice.
I see.
And that has huge implications for healthcare overall.
It feels like that completely changes the conversation around obesity, doesn't it?
Right.
But, I mean, wouldn't it be incredibly expensive to cover these drugs for so many people?
That's a good question.
Because we're talking potentially, what, millions?
Yeah, millions. And that is a concern. Senator Bernie Sanders has actually raised that point,
Okay.
saying it could bankrupt the healthcare system.
Oh, wow.
But at the same time, you have to consider that treating obesity effectively, I mean, if we can do that,
Right.
then that helps prevent complications like diabetes and heart disease.
Which are expensive to treat.
Yeah. So the big question is, do those long-term savings outweigh the initial cost of the drugs?
So it's kind of like an investment, right? Like you spend now to potentially save more later on down the road.
Some experts think that's exactly the case. Dr. Susan Spratt, who is an endocrinologist at Duke, she's argued that point,
Yeah.
that if fewer people end up needing those expensive treatments for diabetes, heart disease, all those complications,
Right.
then that could actually lead to savings for the healthcare system.
That makes sense.
But of course, we have to consider the cost of the drugs themselves, too.
For sure.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about Medicare and Medicaid.
Right.
This proposal could be a huge deal for people who are on those programs, maybe even life-changing for some.
Yeah, yeah.
But what about everybody else?
Yeah, good question.
People like me and you. What about folks with employer-provided insurance? Could this affect us too?
Potentially, yes. Because right now, less than 20% of large companies are covering weight loss drugs,
Oh,
according to a health affairs survey.
So if Medicare and Medicaid start covering these drugs, could that put pressure on those private insurers to do the same?
There could be pressure, yeah, to follow suit.
So it might change healthcare costs for businesses
Yeah,
and their employees
absolutely.
across the board.
Across the board.
So this is something that could have ripple effects far beyond those government programs.
All right.
Okay. But, there's another side to this whole thing.
What's that?
Access to these drugs, it's not equal right now,
No, it's not.
especially for certain racial and ethnic groups.
Yeah, there are big disparities there.
So Dr. Laura DiMattia,
Uh-huh.
who's a bariatric medicine specialist, she brought up this point,
Okay.
that the populations on Medicare and Medicaid, they're often the most at risk when it comes to obesity,
Right.
but they've been largely excluded from being able to access these drugs.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
And that comes down to cost,
It's
right?
a big part of it, yeah.
So, this proposal, it could help level the playing field a little bit
It could, yeah.
and address some of those disparities.
It has the potential to, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the cost, we've talked about access,
Right.
but we haven't even talked about the science behind these drugs.
The science, yeah.
What are they? Are they just appetite suppressants,
That's a good question.
or is there more going on?
So they're more sophisticated than your typical appetite suppressant.
Okay.
These new drugs, we're talking about Wegovy, for example,
Yeah.
these are what's called GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Okay, so break that down for me.
So they basically work by mimicking a hormone that occurs naturally in the body.
Okay.
And that hormone helps control blood sugar, helps manage your metabolism,
Okay.
and yes, it can help you feel full.
So instead of focusing on like willpower,
Yeah.
these medications are working with the body's chemistry to achieve those weight loss results.
Right, exactly.
But here's what's fascinating to me. These GLP-1 drugs, they may actually have even more uses than just weight loss.
That's what's so interesting about all this. Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
Tell me more.
So early studies are suggesting that they could be beneficial for things like reducing alcohol consumption
Wow.
and maybe even treating sleep apnea.
So this is about way more than just weight loss. This could be about new treatments for all kinds of conditions. And that raises a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
This is really interesting stuff.
We're really just beginning to understand, the full potential of these drugs,
Yeah.
both for weight loss, but also beyond that.
Yeah.
It's a rapidly developing area of research with a lot of exciting possibilities, but also
Sure.
a lot of challenges and unknowns.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start to dig into those challenges a little bit. What are some of the potential downsides to these new weight loss drugs?
Well, like any medication, they do come with potential side effects.
Okay, so what are we talking about?
Fairly common ones are things like nausea, vomiting,
Yeah.
digestive issues. Those tend to be mild and temporary.
Okay.
But for some folks, they can be more severe
Right.
and last longer.
So it's not just an easy fix for everybody.
Right. Exactly.
Are there concerns about long-term effects from these medications?
That's one of the big questions right now.
Yeah.
Because these drugs are relatively new,
Uh-huh.
we're still gathering data on their long-term safety.
Okay.
So, there are some concerns about potential risks.
Like what?
Things like pancreatitis, gallbladder issues.
Okay.
But more research is definitely needed to fully understand those long-term effects.
So it sounds like we need more information before we can really say whether the benefits outweigh the risks for everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's say this proposal gets approved. Then what?
That's a good question.
How do we actually make sure people who need these medications can get them?
Exactly. That's a big hurdle.
It's not just about insurance coverage.
No.
Right. We need enough healthcare providers who are trained to actually prescribe these medications, manage them safely,
Exactly.
make sure they're being used properly.
Exactly. So we could end up with the situation where there's a shortage,
Of qualified people.
of qualified healthcare professionals,
Right.
especially in areas that are already underserved.
Right.
And then there's the issue of supply and demand.
Yeah, because these drugs are in high demand. We've already talked about that.
Right, they already are, yeah. So if we suddenly have millions of people who are newly eligible for coverage,
Yeah.
that could lead to some supply chain
I'll
problems.
say that.
We could even see rationing.
Wow. So even with, good intentions,
Yeah.
there are a lot of practical challenges to overcome.
Absolutely. And then, we've got to talk about the financial side of things.
Right, because we talked earlier about the cost
Yeah.
of these medications being a major concern.
Right, and even if Medicare and Medicaid do end up covering part of the cost,
Right.
there are still going to be out-of-pocket expenses.
For patients.
For patients, yeah. And the overall impact on healthcare spending could be pretty big.
So it sounds like we're really trying to balance things here.
Right.
The potential benefits,
Right.
the potential risks,
Yeah.
the costs.
Exactly. Weighing all those factors and considering the bigger picture. And I think this whole debate, it really goes beyond just dollars and cents. I mean, it raises some fundamental questions.
Like what?
About how we define health,
Uh-huh.
how we allocate healthcare resources,
It's okay.
how we approach, this complex issue of obesity as a society.
So much to think about.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
So where do we go from here? I mean,
Yeah.
what can our listeners do to kind of stay informed about this and participate in the conversation as this unfolds?
Well, staying informed is key.
Yeah.
So following the news, reading articles.
Make sure they're from reputable sources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learn about the science.
Right.
Learn about the policy debates surrounding these medications.
And do your own research. Don't just take our word for it.
Right. Exactly. And then engage in the conversation.
Yeah, I like that.
Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues.
Your neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts, your concerns.
Yeah.
Talk to your elected officials. Let your voice be heard.
Because this is something that really affects all of us one way or another, right?
Absolutely.
Whether directly or indirectly. You mentioned earlier that these GLP-1 drugs, they might have applications beyond weight loss,
Yeah.
like reducing alcohol consumption,
Right.
treating sleep apnea. Can you tell us more about that research?
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. And it's early, it's early research.
All
but
story.
But the studies that have been done so far, they've shown that these GLP-1 drugs can reduce those alcohol cravings,
Really?
reduce the amount that people drink. So they're offering a potential new approach to treating, alcohol use disorder.
That could be a game changer
Yeah,
for folks who are struggling with that.
absolutely. And then there's also some promising research on using these drugs to treat sleep apnea.
Okay.
And one study found that they actually significantly reduced sleep apnea severity in obese patients.
So for people who are both obese and suffer from sleep apnea, this could be a double benefit.
It really could. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. It is. And I think these are just two examples, of the potential these drugs hold
Right.
beyond just weight loss.
Yeah.
So as the research continues, we might find even more ways to use them
Right.
to improve people's health and well-being.
This is why we love doing these deep dives. It's so fascinating.
Uh-huh.
Uncovering these connections, often surprising connections, between different areas of science and health.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's constantly evolving, which what we know today could change tomorrow,
Sure.
which is why it's so important to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.
Absolutely. Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We've talked about the potential benefits of these new weight loss drugs, the risks, the challenges, and making them accessible to everyone.
The wider implications for healthcare,
Yeah.
for society as a whole,
Yeah.
and even this exciting potential for treating other conditions.
Right. Beyond obesity.
It's a really complex issue.
It is. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But hopefully, this deep dive has given our listeners a better understanding of this whole landscape
I hope so.
and some things to think about as they navigate this evolving conversation.
Right.
And as always, we encourage you to do your own research,
Absolutely.
form your own opinions,
Yeah.
make your voice heard.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, we've talked about the policy, we've talked about the benefits, the risks.
Yeah.
But there's one really crucial aspect, I think, that we haven't touched on yet.
What's that?
The ethical considerations.
Yeah, the ethical considerations. I mean, this proposal, these medications, they really force us to think about some pretty big questions.
Like what? What kind of questions?
Questions about, our values as a society. What do we consider healthy?
Right.
How do we define beauty?
Mm-hmm.
And where do these weight loss drugs fit into all of that?
It makes you wonder if we're maybe medicalizing something that's just, I don't know, like a natural part of being human.
Right.
Human diversity.
Yeah.
Could this lead to more pressure on people
Yeah.
to conform to a certain ideal?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
As these medications become more widely available, we really need to be careful that we don't create this situation where people feel like, oh, I have to take this drug now
Right.
to fit in,
To meet some standards.
to meet some arbitrary standard.
Yeah. We need to make sure that people feel empowered
Absolutely.
to make their own choices
Yes.
about their health, about their bodies.
Right.
Without being judged.
Exactly.
Without feeling stigmatized no matter what they choose.
It's so important. And it's important to remember that health and well-being, they're not one size fits all.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
What works for one person may not work for another.
Exactly.
It goes back to that idea of personalized medicine or individualized healthcare.
Yeah.
Finding what works best for each person's individual needs and circumstances.
Absolutely. And it's about promoting, I think, a more holistic view of health.
Okay.
One that takes into account physical well-being,
Yeah.
mental well-being,
Right.
emotional well-being.
It's so much more than just the number on the scale.
It really is. It's about, feeling good in your own skin,
Yeah.
having the energy to do the things that you love,
Yeah.
living a full and meaningful life.
I like that. Okay, so we're wrapping up this deep dive here. What is the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
More than anything, I want people to stay engaged
Okay.
because this is an evolving landscape. There's a lot going on here, a lot of implications, scientific, social,
Right.
economic. There are no easy answers.
Right.
But by staying informed, by asking those tough questions, by sharing our perspectives, we can help shape a future where health and well-being are truly accessible for all.
I love that. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep the conversation going.
Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.